Imagine if today was the day your idea changed someone's life. Imagine if you could help someone pay for college, help your community build a new playground, or help a child make it to that dream competition. With GoFundMe, it's all possible. GoFundMe is the world's #1 fundraising platform trusted by over 190 million people. Every week, ordinary people meet their goals and do extraordinary things. Your ideas matter. GoFundMe isn't just for emergencies. Want to raise money for your kid's soccer team or raise funds for a small business, a creative project, or event? GoFundMe helps you turn ideas into reality. And help adds up. Fundraisers you start for someone else raise up to 5 times more. So think right now, who could use your help? Change rarely comes from waiting. It comes from someone deciding, today I'll start. Don't wait for someone else to bring change. Today, start your fundraiser in just minutes at GoFundMe.com. That's GoFundMe.com to start your fundraiser. GoFundMe.com. This is a commercial message brought to you by GoFundMe.
Hello, this is Matt from the Explorers Podcast. I want to invite you to join me on the voyages and journeys of the most famous explorers in the history of the world. These are the thrilling and captivating stories of Magellan, Shackleton, Lewis and Clark, and so many other famous and not so famous adventurers from throughout history. Go to explorerspodcast.com or just look us up on your podcast app. That's the Explorers Podcast.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 575, Operation Supercharge. Last time, with the attack on the Mareth line getting bogged down, Monty decided to swing hard with a left hook, i.e. General Freyberg's thrust, now joined by the 10th Corps and the 1st British Armored Division. But as 2 German divisions were currently in their way, there was to be a massive air and artillery attack first. Whether consciously taking a page from the Germans' book or not, Operation Supercharge was to start with an air artillery attack. Then a combined infantry and tank force would hit the German line, creating an opening. After carving out a 3-mile-long path, then the 1st British Armored Division, with General Horrocks among them, would dash another 2 miles and take El Hama. That was located about 10 miles due west of Gabes. But more importantly, El Hama was at the eastern end of the Shatt el Fayed, a salt lake, which meant that if the Axis forces in the area needed to retreat deeper into eastern Tunisia, they would have to pass through a 10-mile wide gap between the salt lake and the coast. Unless, of course, they were cut off from this route, which meant a considerable part of the Axis forces in North Africa would be bottled up to either surrender or to try to fight their way out, thus most likely giving them massive casualties and loss of equipment. Again, provided that Operation Supercharge was carried out as planned. General Freyberg wanted to believe in the 1st Armored Division, but the further it drove north, the more it would be surrounded by enemy forces. Hopefully, that's where Patton's forces would come into the picture. Time would tell on both scores. Operation Supercharge was to commence in the early morning hours of March 26th to take advantage of the moonlight. But during the darkness of the 25th, all the Allied planes that could be scrapped together went after the Germans in this narrow valley. Meanwhile, the New Zealanders moved into position behind that old Roman wall on the southern end of the valley. And then the Germans caught a lucky break. As 400 tons of explosives had been dropped on them from the airplanes, a mighty wind then created a sandstorm. The pilots could no longer see their targets and thus had to stand down. Fortunately, this wind only lasted for 30 minutes. Then the bombers and fighters returned. And for the next 2 hours, the Allied aircraft, all kinds, made 412 sorties against the Germans, who had ridges to either side of them. Thus, they had nowhere to go. Now the New Zealanders moved out, and as they approached the battlefield proper, they got to witness groups of 30 Allied aircraft each attack the enemy every 15 minutes. Here's General Horrocks' observation, and while no successful opening move could make the Allies forget the dark days, the countries lost, the bombings over the UK, the tragic loss of life on the Eastern Front, it brought hope, as never before, that this hell may one day be over. Back to Horrocks. The battle went like clockwork. My chief memories are of our fighters and bombers screaming in at 0 feet, the first time that this had been attempted in the desert. Then the tanks of the 8th Armor Brigade advanced up the valley in open order. They thought they were being launched on a second balaclava, i.e. meaning the Crimean War, where the British suffered heavy casualties in the charge of the Light Brigade. But here, going back to Horrocks, there was no hesitation. The New Zealanders emerged from the trenches where they had been lying up all day and swarmed forward. What magnificent troops they were. Finally, the really awesome sight of a whole armored division moved steadily forward. It impressed me so, what it must have looked like to the German defenders. Tanks and still more tanks moving cautiously towards them. Then suddenly, it was dark, and we halted. This was the most trying time of all. We could not even risk that the 8th Army panacea for all ills brew up. We just had to sit deep in the enemy's position and wait. At last, thank goodness, we were off again. It was just possible to make out the dim shape of the tanks in front. At times, the tanks were crunching over occupied enemy trenches, and we could see terrified parties of Germans and Italians running about with their hands up. Our progress was desperately slow. That was my chief worry. If we did not succeed in getting through in the dark, the situation in the morning did not bear thinking about. We should be surrounded by the enemy and dominated by the hills to either side of the valley. Hence, the key to this and every other battle was advancement. But that's when the British tanks started running into wadis, which had to be investigated first for their depths. This slowed the armor down. Fortunately for the tanks, it was still dark, so they were not exposed as they could have been. Still, the German lines started to collapse. The first was overrun, the second was under intense pressure, the third was already being shelled, which was enough for von Lieberstein, the commander of the 164th Infantry Division, but also the overall commander in the area. He ordered a pullback. And yet, being an experienced officer, he used the time created by the now slower moving British tanks, supported by the New Zealanders, to pull together enough 88s to form an anti-tank screen at the far end of the valley, about 3 miles south of El Hama. Between the wadis, the darkness, and the 88s, Horrocks' advance came to a halt, which is when the first sunlight came. Those 88s had to be respected, but the order to advance had been given, which is when the winds whipped up more sandstorms. Horrocks and Freiberg had been in the desert long enough to know that moving during a sandstorm would lead to cohesion being lost. Still, Allied tanks were now mostly through the valley, putting them, relatively speaking, behind the Mareth line. Seeing this, General Mies ordered the bulk of the 1st Italian Army to pull back through the Gabes Gap to set up a new defensive line. Hey everyone, Ray here. Do you honestly think that you are the only one struggling with ED? Please, you're not. In fact, 40% of men experience ED by the age of 40. But now there's an easier way to fix it, all from your home. No awkward conversations, no doctor's office. Let RexMD, an online telehealth service that helps men get real FDA-approved ED medications, help you regain your confidence. Here's how it works. First, ED meds are not one size fits all, but RexMD has you covered with options. You'll tell them what's going on, your health history, and what you're looking for through a short quiz. Then a U.S. licensed provider will review your information and prescribe a medication, if appropriate. Your treatment will be sent to you with free 2-day delivery. That's it. It's that easy. And the Rex MD team is there for any questions you have. And again, just know you're not alone in this, but some men are taking the bull by the horns. What are you waiting for? These are the good years. Now, make them better. And you can get up to 95% off ED treatment with Rex MD. Visit rexmd.com/WW2. This is going to change everything. See full details and usage at rexmd.com. Prescription required. Results may vary. Over the next few days, more Axis units here pulled back, with the Allies following them. By March 29th, the Battle of the Meureth Line had become the retreat from the Meureth Line for the Axis forces. The line in its entirety was now controlled by the Allies, as was the town of Tebaga, where Freiberg and company had come through. General Horrocks, of course, stayed on the enemy as close as those 88s would allow him to, hoping to stop the Germans and the Italians from setting up another firm defensive line along the Wadi Akarit, which ran along the northern part of the 10-mile gap. But if Patton's forces to the northwest of the gap could come closer, again, there might be another chance of cutting off the enemy's retreat. Patton's opening move was to have Allen's 1st U.S. Division push east and clear the closest part to them of the Gumtree Road, the northern of the two roads in that area, and the enemy forces just below it. Meanwhile, Edie's 9th U.S. Division was to clear the Gabes Road that led to that town and the high ground that dominated the road from the south, in particular, Point 369, a height south of the road. If they were to advance, there could be no German guns on 369. This attack started during the night of March 28th, as clearly the enemy was in retreat, which would hopefully give the Americans an easier time of this. The Americans got their wish at first. Allen's experienced division cleared the first part of Gumtree Road, but they could not take Point 482, located in between the roads, but closer to the southern road, that allowed German artillery there to harass Edie's men to the south. This, combined with Edie's inexperienced troops, proved to be his part of the plan's undoing. Edie's 9th had not had time for a proper reconnaissance, and as it was dark, this only added to the confusion. Worse, their maps were incomplete. Hence, the two leading battalions mistook Point 290 just below the Gabes Road for Point 369 further south, and that was their objective. Thus, they ended up going north of Point 290, taking neither height. The 3rd and 4th battalions might have been able to correct this, but they were already completely lost within the edges of the Jebel Burda, which was further south, and they stayed lost for 36 hours. Not waiting for these battalions to figure things out, Patton had reinforcements rushed up by trucks, but in their haste, they came too close to Point 290 and were fiercely attacked by German guns on the height. Some of the men were able to retreat right then and there. The rest were pinned down by fire. They could not escape until darkness came. It was this unfortunate turn of events that gave General Mies more time to set up along the Wadi Akirit, when he might have been hit from the front and rear. It was at this point that C&C Alexander stepped in. Yes, the Americans had not gotten the job done, and those that had retreated were demoralized, something that the C&C had been hoping to avoid. But now was the time to strike, as the enemy was off balance. So he, Alexander, would take a risk. Altering Patton's orders for the 4th time, Alexander told Patton to use his infantry to hold McNassie, Saneed, and Gafsa, and then to send a strong armored force down the Gabes Road starting tomorrow. Hopefully, this would panic Mies, who would pull back from the Wadi Akirit, which was becoming stronger by the hour. But for General Mies, it wasn't a question of being unnerved by his enemy's moves. He simply had to wait for transport for his infantry to arrive before he could do anything. General Horrocks suspected this on March 30th and guessed what Monty would do next. The 8th Army commander would either have to use the mobile 10th Corps to smash the Wadi Akirat line, which would undoubtedly end with heavy casualties and loss of vehicles, but it might work. Otherwise, the attack would have to wait for General Lee's 30th Corps to be brought forward, another issue of transportation. But taking this thought experiment one step further, Monty would need the mobile 10th Corps to give chase across the Tunisian plain once Mies's forces did retreat, which meant it would have to be the 30th Corps. Horrocks had guessed correctly, but Monty would not wait for the next full moon. The 30th Corps was ordered forward. The attack would start on April 6th, when sufficient ammunition could be brought to the point of attack. Also, in that time, perhaps Patton's forces would get close enough to the Wadi line that Mies would be forced to send a panzer division to check him, thus weakening the Axis defensive line at the Wadi. And Patton was currently getting things underway for a massive attack. Ignoring General Ward's cautious advice, Patton selected an old friend, Colonel Clarence C. Benson, for his aggressiveness to lead what was coming. And what was coming was a force of 2 armored divisions, 1 armored infantry division, 1 infantry division, 1 reconnaissance, 1 tank destroyer, and 2 artillery battalions with the needed engineers and service troops. Further, the artillery of the 1st and 9th Divisions would be brought together to support this endeavor, while the infantry of the 1st and 9th would attack points 482 in between the roads and 369 south of the lower road to cover Benson's flanks while he broke through, as he would be dashing just north of the Gabes Road. Patton's thinking was, with these 2 infantry divisions covering Benson's flanks, he should have a good start. Point 290, closer to the southern Gabes Road, would just have to wait. This attack started at 6 a.m. on March 30th, the day Horrocks guessed that the enemy infantry was stuck on the Wadi line until trucks could get to them. The 2 divisions' artillery opened up on points 482 and 369, but this only allowed Allen's men to take most, but not all, of point 482. Meanwhile, Edie's men did get close to point 369, but that was it. So when Benson's force started out at noon, German guns were still free to aim for his vehicles. Most of the damage came from Hill 369, south of the Gabes Road. Then, Benson's tanks ran into a minefield. That forced them to halt. They would have to wait until darkness for their engineers to come forward and open up a lane. That night, the engineers did work feverishly, but by dawn, there was only 1 lane open. A bright spot for the Allies took place the next day, March 31st. Benson, while stopped by the minefield, had some of his infantry attack and take point 290 on his southern flank, located in between the Gabes Road and point 369 further south. After this limited success, Patton was seriously considering ordering Benson to just push through the minefield, damn the losses, because he wanted to be a part of Monty's success at the Wadi line. Then he thought better of it and decided to stick to the basics. Besides, there were Axis troops enough near his positions, might as well kill as many of them as possible. So now riled up, Patton went into overdrive, which turned out to be extremely fortunate for the American forces here. First, he had McQuillan's CCA in McNassey attack Colonel Lane's blocking force just east of that town. This would hopefully draw German reserves who would be waiting for the next hot spot. But then Patton's attention was drawn to his own next hot spot, behind Benson's force at El Guitar. When Benson had tried to move out, the Panzer Grenadier Regiment, Africa, had moved closer to make sure that this large American force did not break through to threaten Meese's rear. Then the Grenadier Regiment was joined by the entire 21st Panzer Division. Next, Kesselring ordered the Luftwaffe to hit Benson's force and the Americans at El Guitar. So the Americans were being pressed hard, but Alexander was happy that Patton had been able to draw off 2 panzer divisions from Monty's front. On the other hand, with Benson's attack stalled and the Americans being pressed, the messages flying back and forth around Allied high command were anything but nice. It was time for accusations to start flying as frequently as shells. First, the CNC was disappointed in Benson's, i.e. Patton's, attack. In turn, Patton was angry at Alexander for being overcautious, as he had wanted to attack the Gabes Road days before. In Patton's estimation, his forces would have been able to push the Centauro Division aside within the El Guitar ridges that were now holding up the American forces, because the Germans were now there reinforcing them. And now Alexander wanted Patton to clear the ridges of the entire area, though they held 1 Italian and 2 German divisions within them. Patton was also hot that the Luftwaffe was bombing his various positions, it seemed, with impunity. Hell, even Patton's headquarters had been plastered, to use his word. So, as the messages continued between the 2nd U.S. Corps and the Tactical Air Forces, the words became uglier, the accusations more intense. It got to the point that Eisenhower and the CNC had to step in with all their charm and smiles. Patton realized he had to stop screaming at the airmen, but he was still in an ugly mood, so he would now vent his anger on General Ward of the 1st Armored Division. Ward was out, and again General Harmon in Morocco was ordered to come to the front. Side note, Ward would return to the United States, but later would lead another armored division in Northwest Europe to good effect. Back to business, with Benson's force stuck and the 21st Panzer at El Guitar, Alexander changed Patton's orders for the 5th and final time. Using what had worked well at El Alamein, Alexander wanted from Patton short, sharp operations against the Germans, but first with adequate reconnaissance and planning. Again, small moves, well thought out, backed by plenty of artillery, and where success was guaranteed, as much was possible in war. Which is exactly what Patton did for the next 6 days. The 1st and 9th U.S. Divisions nibbled at the Axis-held ridges. This caused a lot of casualties on each side, and in time, the U.S. divisions had to start using their engineers to fill the vacancies. But it was getting the job done. By April 5th, something unclear was going on behind the Axis lines in this area. Patton believed that another large-scale panzer attack was coming, like the one in where the 1st U.S. Division had to stop the 10th Panzers with numerous defensive lines, but mostly along the Wadi Kadab, back on March 25th. So again, that same wadi was reinforced, and the positions in front of it were given additional artillery and tank destroyers. It was time to brace for another German surge, if that's what it was. No, the Allied leaders could not know what was going on behind the Axis curtain, but had they known, they would have smiled. For the comments and accusations between von Arnim, Meese, Kesselring's staff, and the Commando Supremo made the Allied disagreements seem like raised eyebrows at high tea. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So in and of itself, Operation Supercharge worked brilliantly. You had your enemy in a rather narrow valley. You bomb the shit out of them, between air and artillery, mostly air, obviously. And you just, there's nowhere for them to go. And so you weaken them, you demoralize them. They certainly aren't getting sleep. They're already having supply issues, and then you hit them with all these forces that Freiburg and Horrocks had. So again, pretty impressive stuff. But that was one of the things that you have to give Monty credit for, and he certainly instilled it, to not go until you're ready, until you have an advantage numerically or in some other way. So he has to be admired for that. So anyway, so now it's the Americans against the Germans. We'll have to wait and see what happens. I'm switching tracks now for you members out there. So we finished up the Greenland series. I found another one, but this one is, well, I can't find any ebooks, PDFs on it. So I had to actually order a paper book, actually 2 paper books to get some information on it. So anyway, so that will be coming soon. I did find another cool little story. It's not like it's really in depth. I think I can cover it in 2 episodes. So I will put those out next week to make up for no membership episode coming out this week. And then when my books come in, then we can get started on the other one. But I'm going to save that as a surprise as well. Anyways, so I just wanted to let you know that yes, there was not a membership episode out this week, but I will compensate next week to the best of my ability. Anyway, so that's that. As far as donations, I would like to thank Jessica Corrales Bellamy. I hope I said that right, Jessica. Thank you for the donation. Greatly appreciated. And so this weekend, I'm going to be hopefully finished painting my house because somehow my 20-year-old daughter is now in charge and tells us what to do. Anyways, it's a very fluid situation. So we'll be painting this weekend and podcasting next week. As always, take care, everyone.